Good morning. This is being recorded on June 24th, and the topic is foreign policy. But before I get onto the topic, I have a few announcements. First, you may recall I'm operating on an academic calendar, and so this is the last session in the 23-24 series of Ali Talks. The fall series starts on September 30th, Monday, September 30th. I will start going again every 2 weeks, okay? Now, in the event that something very interesting or serious happens in world affairs in July and August, I might throw in an additional random session, so we'll be able to see that on your Ali page. But the formal every 2 weeks season starts again September 30th. Also, I want to thank Dean Götterer, without whose technical assistance, but also general support, this would not be working very well. Not only does he put this all online for us, but he is a partner in crime. He often suggests topics or titles or things. My title isn't as good as it should be or clear as it should be. Sometimes he sees an article that is of interest that I might have missed. So I really do want to thank, and we all owe gratitude to Dean Götterer. Okay, now let me launch into the subject for today. Obviously, it's insane to talk about the foreign policies of, almost 200 countries or myriad of things that are going on in the world. But what I do want to talk about sort of more generally is some contemporary issues that I think are useful to inform us as we read the papers and as we listen to the debate, etc., etc. So let me just try to identify some issues to think about. The first issue is that for better or for worse, Americans don't much interest themselves in foreign policy. Whenever there is a poll listing various issues and people rank them in their order of interest, let's say 5 or 6 items, the economy may be first, migration maybe, or immigration may be second, and so forth. Foreign policy, generally speaking, is last. And the problem for us in the United States is that since there's so little interest and so little knowledge about foreign policy, obviously our electorate is not very well informed, which is, you might say, well, that must be true of all countries. Well, to some extent, but very many countries in the world, including large countries like China, people interest themselves in foreign policies because they think they matter. And from the perspective of the US, historically, it didn't seem to matter a lot. We were an isolationist country. And as the time moved along, it also didn't seem to matter so much because we were such a powerful and influential country. So we came out of the Second World War, right? The great victors of the Second World War. We were role models for democracy, role models for fashion, right? Everybody started wearing jeans, listening to American music and so forth. So we were seemingly sort of in the driver's seat and didn't have to worry a lot. And while this sort of lack of focus and interest on the American electorate on foreign affairs was going on, all kinds of rather horrible things happened, including things where the chickens are coming home to roost today. So, for example, we keep talking about, Iran and the problematic of Iranian activity in the Middle East. And its nuclear potential capacity and so on. Well, in some ways, of course, US policy helped produce these things. US intelligence participated in the overthrow of the first democratically elected government many years ago after the Shah. So we kind of undermined Iranian's democratic development. Not to just move to more recently, we had Iran sort of tied down with lots of inspection for not developing its nuclear capacity beyond a certain point. And then President Trump came along and nixed that particular treaty agreement. And so now, of course, in theory at least, Iran is perfectly, legally at least, entitled to, have a nuclear arsenal and possibly threaten countries in the Middle East if a nuclear or war breaks out in that part of the world, which is not beyond imagination. So some of the things that have gone wrong in the world have been the cause of America's either short-sighted, bad policies, or unwillingness of the populace to weigh in, whether it's through elected officials or otherwise, and say, we don't approve of this. So pretty much the executive branch of the government, along with the military and often along with Congress, for example, right now, can more or less do anything at once. And we might, on the evening news say, oh, well, that's unfortunate, but it isn't a priority for us in any particular way. So now we get to the present. We get to the present where lots of chaos is taking place in the world. We're about to have a presidential election. What the world sees and hears is what the candidates in Congress have to say. And there is no particular reason to delve much more deeply into the headlines of the news. Let me take the example of the assault on the U.S. border of all these immigrants coming in. Trump refers to them as polluting our blood, reducing America's workers' well-being, and in the imagination on any poll is the idea that half of Mexico is invading the world, the U.S. Interestingly enough, most of the people who are currently trying to cross the border aren't Mexicans at all. They're people from Latin America, Venezuela, Central America, China, Afghanistan, all kinds of parts of the world. In fact, relatively few Mexicans are trying to cross the border legally and illegally. And there is also a return to Mexico on the part of people of Mexican origin who've lived in the United States for a while. So even there's no accuracy. There's just rhetoric. And the rhetoric very often leads to policies which are detrimental, not only to the well-being and the economy of the United States, but detrimental to the view that the U.S. is putting out there in the world. So as we speak, most of the European countries are treading water, being totally alarmed about the prospect of Trump coming into power, and trying to fix some things quickly, but also trying to figure out what will happen if he comes into power, because Trump has said that he is not particularly in favor of NATO, that, if Putin wants to invade East European countries that have not paid their full 2% dues to NATO, Putin should go right ahead. In other words, and I don't need to rehearse them all for you, these sort of irresponsible statements, which more or less all countries in the world right now are very freaked out about. They may not approve of current American policy, or be happy about, America's lack of support for certain policies in the world. But they're totally freaked out about what's going to happen to American policy in the event that Trump comes into power. Now, this has, on the one hand, a kind of a treading water and protectiveness that has emerged, for example, especially in Europe, but it also, of course, has strengthened some institutions. So, for example, the members of NATO are now much more sensitive to the fact that if the US is no longer willing to play ball and meet its full obligations to NATO, they better step up and keep NATO going. So in some odd way, the support for NATO in Europe has been strengthened based on the disarray or potential disarray on the part of the United States. In terms of arms that are available and that are being used, there's also a kind of a disconnect is probably the wrong word between how we imagine ourselves and how the rest of the world imagines us, whether they're allies or opposition. There is no question that the US is the largest arms producer in the world, and in conflicts such as in the Middle East right now, but also in Ukraine, everyone is dependent and has been dependent on US arms supply. What does that mean? Well, at the moment, it means that a lot of European countries are trying to increase their arms production, but it also means that our responsibility for putting arms in the hands of people whose policies may or may not be in the interest of the United States. Most Americans don't really care as long as we're strong and we're providing arms and so forth. And countries like Iran, like Turkey, like Russia, like China might be forgiven if they consider themselves that they need to enhance their arms capacity, their drones capacity, their nuclear capacity, etc., because they have to protect themselves against the American arms, either used by the United States or used by others. We like to think of ourselves as a peaceful country. And of course, one can make the argument, and the sort of realist school of international politics makes the argument, the more powerful and stronger you are, not only the safer you are, but in the case of a major power like the United States, the safer the world is. But many people around the world don't buy into this. So we are in a situation in this June of 2024 of people who used to think of the US as a kind of an anchor, as a reliable partner, as setting a good example, that this has all sort of frayed over the last decade or more. And now it's not just frayed, but it's also the fear that this will get even worse. Now, the US, of course, is not the only country where, for example, immigrants are destabilizing the body politic. That's true throughout Europe. Almost all European countries are now anti-immigration. Too many people coming in, creating diversity in the population. For example, in Scandinavian countries, right, that used to be very homogeneous. Now they have large immigrant population coming from very different cultures, religions, and so forth. So the world's population in individual countries has gotten much more diversified. But we used to be the role model for countries able to absorb people and turn them in the next generation into Americans who may still have roots somewhere else, might be, speaking more than one language, but in any event, people who are fully American. And in any event, treating people, immigrants, legal and illegal immigrants, as on the whole welcome. Now, that, of course, is to some extent rhetorically the sort of image we sold to ourselves, Actually, we have historically been much more prejudiced and anti-immigration. For example, I lived in New York City in the 1950s, and the right-wing sort of demagoguery of the kind you get from Trump right now used to be that Italians and Irish were polluting the residents of New York State and New York City, right? And in earlier history, it was various laws, immigration laws were passed perfectly. People were immigrating legally, but immigration laws were to make quotas so that fewer Asians could enter the United States. So we've always been prejudiced and racist to a certain degree. And we don't have, a very sunny history with respect to all of that. But still in all, as a nation of immigrants who on the whole welcomed people, treated them well, and so on, we're kind of a role model to the world, and that has essentially eroded and may erode even further. Now you're going to say, well, this is a particular subject. How does this have a bearing on other policies? Well, when you're not respected, when you are an actor that looks like a bully, when you are an actor that seems to primarily be welcomed by its military hardware and software that it's selling around the world, and therefore killing people in countries right and left, when you are not reliable. And then when you support situations that are blatantly inappropriate in terms of post-World War II institutions and laws, you undermine your capacity, your leverage, the respect that people have, and your ability to influence people. Now, on a slightly different subject, one of the things, of course, the US was credited with and contributed much to was the international law and the international institutions that were developed after the Second World War. The whole United Nations and all its specialized agencies, and all the bodies of international law, the development of the international or at least modernization of the International Court of Justice, which has its origins a century earlier, but the UN version, it's part of the structure of the UN Charter. And then, of course, the development of the International Criminal Court, which, by the way, we are not members of, because it was already in the case of Congress that refused to allow the US to become a member, because, of course, we can't give up even the slightest bit of sovereignty to an institution in terms of the right wing. And furthermore, we were afraid that since the military, or at least people in Congress were afraid, that since the US military was pretty much spread all over the world, they might be captured here and there. And then, would they be treated fairly in front of such a court, et cetera, et cetera? I have talked about this in the past, but in any event, in general, US policy had been, after the Second World War, to support international institutions financially, but also politically. That too has eroded. The United Nations system as a whole is much weaker than it used to be. Part of that has to do with matters outside the US control. The vetoes by, let's say, Russia and China in the Security Council, lack of support for certain specialized agencies, and so on. But we've also played a role in this. During this whole mess with Israel and Gaza, the US consistently vetoed resolutions in the Security Council. It has finally at least abstained and therefore allowed one resolution to go forward. But the US has in general lost leverage with the member states of the United Nations because it has not really been the country that shaped and advocated for the international system in the same way that it used to. And now it's even less clear when you have a potential President Trump that international institutions, be they regional, such as the NATO, for example, and or being global, he has no particular interest in any of this. So everybody is, in a sense, treading water to see what will happen. But in the process of treading water, there's been less support. And you can say, well, to what extent, I live here in Santa Cruz, has the UN or these international institutions done anything for me lately? Well, actually, it has, not in a personal way, but in terms of our reputation, our ability to have influence in the world, our ability to be role models. Let me say quickly that in Europe right now, right-wing politicians, as you've probably heard and read, be they in France, the latest, but also in other European countries, have come to the fore, and how much that will affect the sense of institutions and democracy and so on is yet not entirely clear. This is not true of all countries. But, again, the right wing in Congress and potential presidential candidate Trump has already said he would support, more authoritarian governments, and he has. Orban in Hungary, for example, and, any other country in the world where a authoritarian leader has appeared, the Republican in Congress and even some Democrats have given support. So the fear is that it's not just that the world has changed in some senses by weakening democracy, weakening international cooperation, weakening international institution, but that we in the United States, which used to be at the forefront in terms of our foreign policies, have not necessarily continued to play the powerful role we used to play, and at the same time are in danger of playing even less of a constructive and powerful role. Now, you may say, well, you haven't even mentioned, let's say, China. I mean, isn't China a new power? And is it not playing a role? And is it not making life difficult for the United States? Yes, well, this is a different subject, and we've talked about in the past, and I will again next season. But let me illustrate something that has gotten very little attention. We in the United States, in terms of our foreign policy, in terms of economic investment, trade, and so forth, we're heavily engaged in Latin America, our neighbors to the south, and we're quite influential in many South American countries. And after decolonization, we were quite active and influential in any number of West and other African countries. It might have come to your notice that at this point, we have relatively little engagement with Latin America, and who has substituted for us? China and Russia, who have far more leverage and influence on the economy, on resource development, on trade, on all kinds of ways than the United States has right now. And ditto in Africa. We had bases in various former colonies, for example, Niger. Then came the Wagner Group in Russia, which wedged itself into the affairs of any number of guerrilla groups and opposition groups, and eventually governments in West Africa and other African countries. And now essentially we're out of the game in Africa as well. Yes, the the head of the Kenyan government was just here, and they're trying to, link with the U.S. But all these little West African countries which were alienated from their former colonizers like France and Britain and welcomed U.S. interest and participation, have essentially kicked the U.S. out and or diminished the participation on the part of the U.S. So even when you're not talking about something like potential Trump policies or European changes in the European body politics and so forth, we have nothing other than to blame ourselves, and here both Democratic and Republican administration of having really stepped back and frayed our influence capacity in two major continents where we used to have far more influence than we currently have. So it's partly that we have competition like China and Russia, and increasingly Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, and so on. And of course, some of this competition is not just the consequence of the US, but also the strengthening and capability of those countries and their more far-flung interests. But, policies and one's ability to influence policies are the underlying word here is influence. And there, a technical term emerges, which is there's hard and soft power. Hard power is military power. And there's no question that the US still dominates hard power, although its ability to control things, if in fact either in Asia or in the Middle East a nuclear conflict develops and we have World War III, we're in a new ball game. But we do certainly have hard military power that at the moment more or less exceeds everybody's. But here again, as I just indicated, but also, for example, the US Navy was next to none. Well, the Chinese Navy is getting built up and so forth. So we have competition even in the hard power area. But what we really have lost is much soft power. The respect and the idolization of the US as a role model. People in the rest of the world who pay far more attention to international politics and their foreign policies than Americans do, have known for some time that there was a lot of hypocrisy, right? The land of democracy and equality and our beautiful Constitution. And in the meantime, we had slavery and deep, deep discrimination against African Americans, and the civil rights movement, and any news broadcast overseas still shows the degree to which African Americans as a group are more handicapped and less economically affluent due to the history of slavery and post-slavery discrimination and so forth. People who are well versed in reading newspapers overseas have always known that we think more highly of ourselves as a country, and our presidents market us as thinking more highly of ourselves, and that we've always have had deep flaws, inequality, economic inequality, racial inequality, and so forth. But by and large, we were still considered to be a role model. And that helped our foreign policies a whole lot because it enabled us to influence policies of other countries through international law, through international institutions, and through just leverage of soft power, because we were able to, we were respected, and that has seriously eroded. So on the one hand, an American president and American Congress can enunciate a U.S. foreign policy right now, can vote in favor of certain policies, but will find itself less having less leverage in the world, certainly less soft power in the world, for others to listen, to respect, and in a sense to put us on a pedestal of a country to be emulated. Now, let me just end by the mess in the Middle East. There is, and I've talked about this before, a major difference between anti-Semitism, which is discriminatory and which is appalling, and anti-Israel policy, which is not necessarily at all anti-Semitic. And when the world sees right now what is happening in Gaza, to what extent hundreds, 40,000 people have been killed, largely women and children, mowed down in order for Israel to catch the leaders of Hamas, violating every imaginable international law of war, human rights, and so forth, excusing all of that because Hamas needs to be decimated. Most observers who are critical of what's happening, including Israelis, high up Israelis and Israeli population, are appalled to what degree the current right-wing government of Israel manages to convince some in Israel and elsewhere, and certainly convince itself that decimating both the buildings, the lives, the livelihoods, the future of Gazans is justified by catching the leadership of Hamas, even though, of course, we know it committed horrible crimes in Israel. And the world will continue to be amazed to the extent to which even those that survive what is happening in Gaza right now, the very large population of children having lost limbs, being psychologically damaged for life, the incapacity of people to go back to their homes and so forth. That is a world image that is going to be very difficult to live down as an appropriate and measured response to what happened to Israel based on Hamas. And we might consider thinking about the fact that the leadership in Israel that opposes Netanyahu's administration, it has come around to the notion that Hamas is not just a thing or some people. Hamas is an idea. It's an idea of somehow two-state solution, the lives and the future of Palestinians. And indeed, the idea of Hamas, which was very unpopular in the West Bank, has now become even popular on the West Bank. It is not the Hamas leadership, but it is the idea that stands for just future for the Palestinians. And we in the United States are now implicated in this. Of course, Israel has been our ally, and it has received the largest military aid of any country in the world over all these decades. But the fact of the matter is that the fact that these massive bombs are decimating hospitals and schools and killing civilians further reduces our influence and leverage in the world. People can, be of two minds about the whole Middle East situation and of Israel and Hamas. But from the perspective of how the world sees us, we have also lost influence over the recent months of our participation in what's going on. So bottom line, very sad to tell you, to add on a negative note, which is that we used to think of ourselves as the stellar role model of democracy in the world, hoping that other countries would emulate us. And increasingly, we've lost the influence. And if and how we could restore our influence, maybe it's possible, but history will probably recall though we kind of blew it. We may continue to be an important and influential country in some ways, but the majority of the world will not return, I believe, and I could be wrong, to thinking of the US as the role model for everybody in the world. Sorry to end on such a negative note, but I just want to say it helps a lot to have informed citizens. And I hope that your listening to these programs also means you're readers of the New York Times and stay on top of it, because we are able to have some influence on our fellow citizens who seem tuned out or less interested, both as voters and as friends and neighbors and so forth. Anyway, have a good summer. Minimally, I will see you on the recording on September 30th. But as I said, I may throw one or two in June or July, depending on events. Thank you very much.